Thank you, Brandon and Jim, for the invitation to share with you some of our experiences down across the border in Mexico. I wish I could present some of these great success stories of the previous talks. I basically will focus more on the challenges that we are facing down in Mexico in order to achieve calm and to stay calm. I give you more background because you may not be so familiar, and the majority of the audience may not know so well Mexico. Mexico, the arid lands is a, does this work? Oops.
So this is the laser?
Okay, okay. So the majority, over 50% of Mexico is dryland, where we have little precipitation. And this is where we find the dryland biomes, the grasslands, and the scrublands. What are the primary challenges motivating the need for calm in your landscape that we were asked in the region, and why do they need to be addressed at the landscape scale? Well, primarily, we need to maintain this highly diverse grassland and scrubland biome as they are life support systems for a large population. Over 60% of Mexican population live in these areas. Manage land and people in highly coupled dynamic systems, increasingly affected by land degradation and desertification, drought, poverty, and migration. These are key issues that need to be addressed. And also, there's a shift in land tenure and a change in the agrarian and land reform that finally converted private land into communal land for over 100 years. However, we see recent trends again to revert this and to privatize the ejido land. However, if we introduce this ejido land into land markets, what does this mean, even though it may offer livelihood diversification? But what kind of risk are we taking with respect to resilience of these systems? And what will be the future of the ejido as a local institution of governance? And what status will the ejido adopt as a local institution decision-making on the use and management of natural resources? So this is more or less the primary challenge that I think we need to face, which are not easy challenges to take. So Mexico's drylands are highly diverse: grasslands, scrublands, and then open woodlands. There is a great dynamics associated with these rangelands. We have external drivers and internal drivers. Primary production is finally the measure that we are really orienting our decisions on. Internal controls are species compositions. External controls are climate, high variability, frequent occurrences of extreme events. Fire, where there is sufficient fuel. In most of the ejido land, the communal land, there is not sufficient fuel. And then, of course, the important socioeconomic component, the sociocultural and political drivers that control stocking density, which forage species or meat prices, a variable that is at large scale. Living landscapes and realities are more or less the context that we need to see, that the farmers are overall more concerned about sustaining their livelihood and less about ecological sustainability. This is a reality that we need to face as researchers and as managers. And the decisions that are made by farmers are reflected in the landscapes over time, and thus their consequences of intended landscapes are frequently unintended. So we may find hybrid landscapes that turn into challenges for future decision makers. So short-term decisions may feed back in long-term challenges. We need to go back in order to understand the complex socio-ecological system that the drylands of Mexico are. The historical socio-political changes were tightly coupled to large-scale land transformation. Prior to the Mexican Revolution, most of the land belonged to 5% of the population, which were the rich landowners, and the farmers could not own land. The Mexican Revolution ended up in the agrarian land reform which was probably the largest and one of the most important experimentations and reformations in the Mexican social organization. And finally, this resulted that 60% of the land was finally in the hands of the poor farmers, or the majority of the population. And so there was communal property, but under the control of the government. And more recently, in 1992, there was this amendment of article number 27 of the Mexican Constitution, which suggested again privatization of the ejido land, and this as part of the neoliberal policy that was driving Mexican's economy, and the program of Procede, which allows the titling and the parcelization of determined proportion of communal land. So complex landscapes mosaics are the product of land tenure, cultural idiosyncrasies of different ejidos, and land characteristics. So for instance, here we see communal land from one ejido and then another ejido. One ejido decides not to deforest, another one to convert it into a rangeland. And here we have the communal land, which is the grazing land, and then we have household-based subsistence farming. So this is more or less how we have to understand this ejido land. The enormous challenges are desertification. A large area of these arid lands are severely or very severely degraded, where we have a lot of erosion. But then also these areas, from a socioeconomic perspective, are affected by high marginality and poverty. What have been the social and biophysical barriers to addressing these challenges using simpler approaches? Government health programs and subsidy programs have been accompanying, have been guiding the decisions of the ejido people, and mostly following the neoliberal model, where frequent changes and creations of new public policies, one size fits all, has been adopted by the government and different agencies and ministries. And so these are programs that the locals are confronted with, and because these are economic incentives, so why would you turn them down? Most of them have to deal with compensation for production, that people, the farmers, would leave their land, remove livestock, and get compensated money. Progan was a program to support sustainable animal and livestock production. However, if the requirements for the subsidy receiver was that they had in turn to protect, reforest, and revegetate 30 plants, for example, for an animal. But again, this is one program for the whole large area of Mexico. This is a compensation program where livestock was removed, and fencing is a big issue right now in the ejido land of Mexico. And opuntia is planted in form of plantations as either supplementary forage, or they're also exploring it as a potential production of biofuel. As I mentioned, the agrarian reform, this privatization, the incentive is to get actually large private farmers to enter the land markets, and for smallholders to see whether this may diversify their livelihoods. But there are potential risks associated, that there will be limited access or no access to water and forage, and this is causing social conflicts, as there's only limited access to land to those that have been a beneficiary of this agrarian reform, the ejidatarios. Not all farmers and ejidos have the right to actually land or sell or lease their land. What are the effects of these subsidy programs? There's been little research, and there's no monitoring that people have been looking. So people who have access to subsidies, have tractors, convert to monocrops, have vehicles. The effect of subsidy on supporting ecosystem service, what has been shown that they are actually reducing soil fertility in crop fields rather than enhancing fertility. It had also led to an increasing number of these earthen ponds, these little dams, which has also resulted in an increased number of livestock rather than reducing it. A downside also of these subsidies, whether these are opportunities actually or risks, is that we may cross biophysical thresholds. These are sediments that we extracted from these ponds, and we found that the concentration of organic carbon and total nitrogen is almost equivalent. This is the mean that we would find in a grassland, equivalent or higher than what we find in the grassland. So these are hotspots, biochemical hotspots, these ponds. Other challenges, biophysical challenges and barriers, are extreme climate events with severe droughts and torrential rainfalls. Here we had in 5 days almost 100 millimeters, and Mexico has been hit recently by very, very record droughts. We have also been monitoring and witnessing that there has been a shift in the monthly average precipitation. It was in long-term average in July, and now it's moving to September. So these are all changes that are occurring in these lands. So PROCEED, this program, has adverse effects on landscape multifunctionality, as it causes this fragmentation, because privatization means constructing fences. It will alter the hydrological cycle, and we are currently monitoring what the mid- and long-term effects of these changes may be. The reduced mobility causes a high local grazing pressure and therefore land degradation, and what these long-term effects may be, abandonment or migration, nobody knows yet. We have been seeing in some ejidos that where people have been becoming frustrated with government programs, that they have been adopting local adaptive management as alternatives to government programs, where they adopt rotational or seasonal communal grazing in large fenced-off areas during the dry season, while during the all year they are using continuous grazing on communal rangeland. So what effects have we seen? That this rotational grazing during the dry season has actually beneficial effects, that it allows the grassland to recover as we monitored and found enhanced basal cover. Also, when doing somehow the rangeland health assessment, we found that the landscape functional organization index was significantly higher under this rotational grazing. We have also worked with an ejido, asking them to donate an area, and here we have 30-year and 10-year exclosures, to work with them on the potential of these systems to recover, because we have been trying to work with them that we need to do long-term studies and to see the recovery potential of these grasslands, these degraded rangelands, and these serve now as demonstration site for capacity building in systems thinking. We have been showing here that this is a 30-year and a 10-year exclosure, and this is a conventional ejido grazing, where the annual runoff is much reduced, and even after 10 years we see sort of a recovery in runoff. And also the landscape organizational index is highest. So these exclosures, which substantially reduce runoff by over 50%, has convinced these ejidatarios that they want in their own paddocks now adopt reduced livestock, but only because they could witness and be part of these research efforts that we have realized there. What conceptual models have we been using? We have been necessarily, because ejidos are communal lands, we need to adopt a socio-ecological systems approach where monitoring and understanding nonlinear changes is really what drives our research efforts. What we need to identify is resilience and threshold characteristics, because that's what we need to manage the recovery potential of rangelands. And again, these communities that we have been working with are getting familiar now with the concept of resilience, and it's not primary production or forage production that they should really aim for, but the diversity and options for the future. We have adopted, therefore, the dryland development paradigm, which has been a conceptual framework to study desertification, published recently, or about 10 years ago, where these principles guide that we need to look at the coupledness between social and environmental systems, identify key variables, both biophysical and socioeconomic, identify thresholds of these key variables, consider scale, cross-scale interactions, and also be aware of the different types of knowledge systems. Not only scientific knowledge, but local knowledge is equally important. And so with the help of the DDP, this guided inter- and transdisciplinary research, we could identify relevant knowledge sources that need to be considered for adaptive management. And here are some foci that we really look at what are the drivers, what are the types of cross-scale interactions that we need to focus on, what are internal and external drivers that may affect the resilience and the landscape multifunctionality. How is it characterized by looking at the biotic integrity, hydrological function, soil stability, and this is a collective space for the rural community. And then livelihood diversification, consider contemporary and legacy effects. What technologies or tools have been most important and why? Well, we have been advocating that we need an integrated transversal approach, and we are interested in knowing what footprints do these public policies that are popping up so frequently and so rapidly, new ones on range landscapes. And we need historical records of drivers of land use change and adopt a systems approach. So here an example where we tried to see whether we can see the effects of public policies, which, for example, Procampo, which is an agricultural subsidy given per year, or Progan to promote livestock production. We wanted to see how these policies reflect on landscape cover. We used this in the Altiplano, Potosino, and San Luis Potosí. Here we see this brownish color is agriculture, and then this greenish color is grassland, and we see that even though we cannot really identify real causes, but we can see that accompanied to these changes in the subsidy program, we can see shifts in vegetation cover and land use on the map. So we need to go in more detail, but we think this is one of the first evidences that we can actually provide where it suggests that land use policies are seen on the land. So what have we learned about the relationship between science and management? What are the needs? There's a strong impact from public neoliberal policies at the landscape scale. Overall, we find a certain lack of confidence and transparency among stakeholders that is somehow inhibiting this idea of calm. The local ejido level, here we see often strong interests in research findings, and that the ejido people want to actually directly collaborate with the scientists because they want to look for alternative management approaches because they lose confidence in the government programs. There's also what we propose, a strong need to develop a partnership among science, management, and policy, but mostly also maybe include consumers of the products of these rangelands, and maybe involve also schools and consider the future generations. So more capacity building, developing more diverse rangeland products. We need a better institutional capacity and policies for fostering sustainable mixed crop and livestock production systems, and also deal with the unpredicted risks of depopulation of rangeland with recent emerging problems related to organized crime and criminal activities, which is very much a dryland level scale problem in Mexico. So the rangeland landscape is becoming increasingly fragmented. The individual units have specific, often unrelated objectives, like rain-fed agriculture, irrigated crops, livestock production, human settlement, water collection, wind farms, mining, biofuel. Up there is a new wind farm in this ejido. In parallel, diverse disciplines and subdisciplines generate increasingly specialized knowledge and technologies in order to maximize production and appropriation of natural resources and ecosystem or landscape services. These units are linked, however, by biophysical and socioeconomic processes at different scales. And in order to focus on multifunctional rangeland landscapes that are highly heterogeneous, for calm, it is fundamental to consider especially the non-biophysical sources of this heterogeneity that I have been touching in this talk. And in order to achieve changes in the Mexican rangeland landscape that reflect shifts in the political, economic, social, and governance forms, but landscapes and ecology also shape the contours of human decision-making and governance policies. So it's important to consider this feedback. So the challenges for CALM would be to be aware of these multiple cross-disciplinary, cross-sectoral feedbacks and basically keep options open and manage for diversity. Thank you very much.